A 13-year-old boy writing down a license plate would do what police couldn't for 16 months. This isn't another true crime story that glorifies violence. This is the story of how a community caught a serial killer and changed criminal investigation forever. By the end of this video, you'll understand why forensic databases exist, why neighborhoods organize watch groups, and how one fingerprint on a stolen car became the break investigators desperately needed. But to understand how it ended, you need to know how it began, not with violence, but with trust. In the spring of 1984, Los Angeles was a city of open windows. People slept with screens unlatched, trusting in the warm night air and the unspoken agreement that home was sanctuary. This is the story of what happened when that agreement was broken and how a community fought to restore it. But before we begin, a commitment. This is not a story designed to thrill you with horror. It's a story about real people whose lives mattered, victims who were neighbors, parents, children, dreamers. It's about investigators who refused to stop searching, and it's about a community that chose courage over fear. You'll hear about James Romero III, the 13-year-old who trusted his instincts when something felt wrong. You'll see how a single fingerprint cracked a case that had stumped investigators across 2 major cities. And you'll witness a neighborhood that said enough. Drop a comment below if you've ever had that gut feeling that something wasn't right and whether you acted on it. James Romero did, and it changed everything. The measure of this telling isn't whether you're entertained by tragedy, but whether you come away understanding something true about how we protect each other, how systems fail and succeed, and how communities heal. In 1984, Southern California was a patchwork of communities, each with its own rhythm. In Monterey Park, Whittier, Arcadia, and dozens of neighborhoods across Los Angeles County, people lived lives that felt ordinary in the best way, which is to say, they felt safe. Let me introduce you to some of those lives, not as they ended, but as they were lived. Dale Okazaki was 34 years old, living in Rosemead. She worked as a traffic supervisor, the kind of person who took pride in keeping things running smoothly. On weekends, she'd visit with her family, share meals, make plans for the future. She had a roommate, Maria Hernandez, and they'd created a comfortable home together. Vincent and Maxine Zazzara had been married for decades. They ran a pizza restaurant, the kind of place where regulars knew they'd get not just good food, but a warm welcome. Vincent was 64, Maxine was 44, and they'd built something together, a business, a life, a partnership that had weathered years and challenges. William Doy was 66, an engineer who'd spent his career solving problems, making things work. He lived in Monterey Park with his wife Lillian, who was disabled. William took care of her with patience and devotion, the kind of quiet heroism that never makes headlines but defines so many lives. These weren't people who lived recklessly or took foolish chances. They locked their doors before bed, they looked out for their neighbors, they did what reasonable people do to feel safe in their homes. And in the spring and summer of 1984, that wasn't enough. To understand what happened next, you need to understand the tools law enforcement had in 1984. Here's something most people don't know about fingerprint databases in 1985. They weren't like hitting search on your phone. The California Department of Justice had begun digitizing records, but the system was incomplete. Even when you found a perfect print at a crime scene, if that person's fingerprints hadn't been entered into the database yet, you'd get nothing, just blank screens and dead ends. DNA profiling, the technology that would revolutionize criminal investigation, wouldn't be widely available in the United States for several more years. When crimes occurred in different cities, even within the same county, information sharing was slow, cumbersome, dependent on phone calls and physical file transfers. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department covered dozens of incorporated cities, each with different resources and priorities. When a crime occurred in one jurisdiction, investigators there might not know about a similar crime 20 miles away in another jurisdiction. This wasn't negligence. It was the reality of 1980s law enforcement. Good people working with imperfect tools, trying to protect a sprawling metropolitan area where a determined criminal could strike in one neighborhood and disappear into the vastness of the city. The system had gaps, and someone was about to exploit every single one of them. The first attack that would later be connected to what the media called the Night Stalker occurred in June 1984 in the Glassell Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. A young woman named Jenny Vincow, 79 years old, was killed in her apartment. The method of entry? A window. Over the following months, more attacks occurred. Home invasions, almost always at night. Victims of different ages, different backgrounds. The crimes were brutal, senseless in their randomness. Some victims survived, many did not. But here's what's crucial to understand. For months, investigators didn't know they were looking for one person. The attacks seemed scattered, disconnected, different neighborhoods, different victim profiles, slight variations in method. It would take months of painstaking comparison, literally laying out case files and looking for threads before the pattern became undeniable. But investigators didn't know they were looking for one person yet. That realization and the forensic breakthrough that led to it is coming up next. Detective Gil Carrillo was a relatively young detective with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department when he caught a case in Rosemead in March 1985. Dale Okazaki had been shot. Her roommate, Maria Hernandez, had narrowly survived. Within an hour, another shooting occurred nearby. Silean Yu was pulled from her car and shot. Carrillo saw something in the evidence that troubled him. The randomness felt purposeful, if that makes sense. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was someone hunting. He reached out to Frank Salerno, a legendary detective who'd worked the Hillside Strangler case years before. Salerno had seen patterns before. He knew what to look for. If you're wondering why it took so long to connect these cases, you're asking exactly the right question. In 1985, there was no centralized database that automatically flagged similar crimes across different cities. Each department kept its own records. Detectives had to physically call other departments, compare notes by hand, and hope someone else had seen something similar. What followed was months of work that looked nothing like the dramatic detective stories we see on television. It was spreadsheets, file comparisons, phone calls to other departments. Gradually, painfully, Carrillo and Salerno and their colleagues began connecting cases. A shoe print here, a distinctive Avia aerobic sneaker, not commonly worn by men. A similar method of entry there. Ballistics matches on bullets. Small forensic details that individually meant little, but together suggested something terrifying. One person attacking across a wide geographic area, seemingly at random. The investigators couldn't yet know who they were looking for, but they knew they were looking for someone. By May 1985, attacks were occurring more frequently. In Monterey Park, William and Lillian Doy were attacked in their home. William would die from his injuries. Lillian survived, but couldn't provide a detailed description of her attacker. The San Francisco connection almost didn't happen. Here's why. When Peter and Barbara Pan were attacked in San Francisco in August 1985, the SFPD initially treated it as a standalone case. It was only when a sharp-eyed crime scene analyst noticed the distinctive avia shoe print, the same rare pattern that kept appearing in LA, that alarm bells went off. That single detail connected two investigations separated by 350 miles. 2 weeks earlier in Monrovia, another attack. The Nelsons, Mabel, 83, and her invalid sister were beaten in their home. Mabel died. Her sister survived. The crime scenes yielded crucial evidence. The same shoe print kept appearing, those avia sneakers with a distinctive tread pattern. Ballistics showed the same .22 caliber handgun being used in multiple attacks. And at one scene, investigators found something even more valuable, a fingerprint. In 1985, fingerprint matching was transitioning from purely manual comparison to early computerized databases. The California Department of Justice had begun digitizing fingerprint records, but the process was incomplete. When investigators found a clear print, they could run it through the system, but only if the person was already in the database. They ran the print. No immediate match. The person they were looking for either had no criminal record or their prints hadn't yet been entered into the system. The investigators kept working. Every new case meant new evidence, new potential leads. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department created a task force. Jurisdictions began sharing information more actively. And then, in late August 1985, everything changed with a stolen orange Toyota station wagon. When crime scene investigators processed that vehicle, abandoned in Los Angeles after the Mission Viejo attack, they found what would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire investigation: a single, clear, latent fingerprint on the rearview mirror. Perfect ridge detail, identifiable, traceable. But the attacks continued. In August 1985, something changed. An attack occurred in San Francisco, more than 350 miles north of Los Angeles. Peter and Barbara Pan were attacked in their home in the Lake Merced area. Peter died. Barbara survived, though severely injured. The San Francisco Police Department began their investigation, and when they compared their evidence with what was happening in Southern California, they found matches, the same shoe print. Ballistics suggested the same weapon might have been used. This created both a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge, coordinating between Los Angeles County and San Francisco, meant bridging even greater jurisdictional and bureaucratic gaps. Different computer systems, different procedures, different chains of command. The opportunity? More crime scenes meant more evidence, and more evidence meant more chances for the perpetrator to make a mistake. The investigators from both regions began working together, sharing information rapidly. This level of multi-jurisdictional cooperation was relatively unusual for the time. The San Francisco case brought new urgency and new resources to the investigation. And then came the break they'd been waiting for. If this investigation fascinates you, if you're learning something about how forensic science actually worked before computers made everything instant, take a second and hit that like button. It helps more people discover stories told the right way, with respect for victims and accuracy about the investigation. The evidence was mounting, the task force was forming, but they still didn't have a name. That would change with a stolen car and a 13-year-old's instincts. Stay with me. By late summer 1985, fear had settled over Los Angeles like morning fog. The attacks were being covered extensively in the media. The term Night Stalker appeared in headlines. People knew something was happening, even if they didn't know all the details. Hardware stores reported running out of deadbolts in window locks. Locksmiths were booked weeks in advance. In neighborhoods across LA County, people who'd never locked their windows before started checking them twice before bed. But something else happened too, something that often gets overlooked in true crime narratives. Communities came together. Neighborhood watch groups formed or expanded. People checked on elderly neighbors. Block clubs organized. The fear that could have isolated people instead connected them. You might be thinking, why would releasing his photo help if it could also warn him he'd been identified? Great question. Here's the calculation law enforcement made. They believed the danger of him remaining unidentified and free outweighed the risk of him fleeing. And they were betting on something powerful, that in a city of millions, someone would recognize him and make the call. In predominantly Latino neighborhoods like East LA, Boyle Heights, and Lincoln Heights, Spanish-language radio stations became crucial sources of information. Families shared warnings, churches held prayer services and safety meetings. This is important to understand. The community response wasn't just fear, it was vigilance mixed with solidarity. It was people refusing to be paralyzed, choosing instead to look out for each other. The paradox of random violence is that while any individual might be a victim, communities as a whole can choose how to respond. Los Angeles chose to respond together. August 24th, 1985. Mission Viejo, Orange County. A quiet residential neighborhood. A man broke into the home of Bill Carnes and his fiancée, Inez Erickson. Both were attacked. Both survived, though Carnes suffered serious injuries. The attacker fled in a stolen Toyota, and this time, someone saw the car. James Romero III was 13 years old, just a kid on a summer evening. But he noticed an orange Toyota station wagon cruising his neighborhood, slowly, methodically, as if the driver were looking for something. The car seemed out of place. Something felt wrong. James did what seemed like a small thing at the time. He wrote down the license plate number in a notebook. Then he told his parents, who contacted police. That one act of vigilance, trusting his instincts when something didn't feel right, would become the thread that investigators had been searching for. The car was found abandoned in Los Angeles 2 days later, and when crime scene investigators processed it, they found something extraordinary: a clear fingerprint. On August 30th, 1985, investigators ran that print through the California Department of Justice database again. This time, there was a match. Richard Ramirez, born February 29, 1960 in El Paso, Texas. Previous arrests for minor offenses meant his fingerprints were in the system. For the first time in more than a year, investigators had a name, they had a face. The suspect became identified. But now came a difficult decision: what to do with that information. The decision to release the photo was controversial for a reason nobody talks about. It could have backfired spectacularly. If Ramirez had seen his face on the news before anyone recognized him, he could have disappeared into Mexico within hours. The border was less than 2 hours from LA. Law enforcement was essentially gambling that someone, somewhere in a region of millions, would spot him first. It was an enormous risk.
Detectives and law enforcement officials faced a calculation that keeps investigators up at night: release the photo to the public or keep it confidential.
The case for releasing it. Someone out there might recognize him. The public could become the eyes and ears of the investigation. In a region of millions of people, visibility could lead to capture. The case against it. Going public would alert Ramirez that he'd been identified. He might flee to Mexico, go into hiding, or, the darkest possibility, accelerate his violence, knowing his time was limited. Law enforcement agencies conferred. The consensus emerged: the risk of not releasing the photo was greater than the risk of releasing it. Every day he remained free was a day someone else might die. The decision was made: they would give the photo to the media. What happened on August 31st, 1985 in East Los Angeles has been called vigilante justice by some, community courage by others. Here's what actually happened and why it matters. But there was another layer to consider: how to reach all the communities potentially affected. Los Angeles in 1985 was already one of the most diverse cities in America. Information that appeared only in English-language newspapers or on English-language television might not reach Spanish-speaking neighborhoods quickly enough. Spanish-language media, radio stations, newspapers, television were brought into the coordination. On August 30 and 31, Ramirez's photo appeared everywhere. And then the city waited. August 31st, 1985, East Los Angeles. Richard Ramirez walked into a liquor store on Town Avenue. He didn't know his photo had been everywhere for the past 24 hours. He didn't know that thousands of people across the region now knew his face. But the store owner did. She recognized him immediately. Ramirez saw the recognition in her eyes and fled. What happened next was remarkable. As Ramirez ran through the neighborhood, residents spotted him. The word spread, house to house, person to person: he's here. Ramirez tried to steal a car. The owner, Faustino Piñon, was working underneath it. Piñon came out fighting. Others joined in. Ramirez ran again, this time into a different neighborhood, trying to carjack another vehicle. Jose Burgoyne was standing in his driveway when Ramirez attempted to take his car. Burgoyne hit him with a metal bar. Ramirez kept running. By now, a crowd had formed, not a mob in the sense of chaos, but a community that had lived in fear for months and now saw a chance to act. They pursued him. When Ramirez tried to break into another home, the residents fought back. Finally, exhausted, cornered, Ramirez was subdued by community members who held him until police arrived. When Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies arrived, they found Ramirez on the ground, held by residents of the neighborhood he terrorized. They placed him under arrest. The scene was chaotic, angry, raw. The people who'd lived in fear now saw the face of that fear, human and vulnerable and caught. It's important to acknowledge the complexity of this moment. Under the law, Ramirez was entitled to protection while in custody. Vigilante violence, no matter how understandable the anger, couldn't be condoned. But it's equally important to acknowledge what that community did. They saw danger, and instead of hiding, they confronted it. They protected each other. That courage, collective, instinctive, human, is part of this story too. News of the arrest spread rapidly, first through East LA, then across the city, then across the region. The collective exhale was almost audible. But even in that moment of relief, investigators and community leaders knew the truth. An arrest isn't the same as justice, and justice, when it comes, doesn't undo harm.
Richard Ramirez was charged with multiple counts of murder, attempted murder, sexual assault, and burglary. The case was assigned to the Los Angeles County Superior Court. The investigation continued even after the arrest. Forensic evidence was analyzed, witnesses were interviewed, survivors prepared to testify. The legal process, methodical, deliberate, often frustratingly slow, began. On September 20, 1989, after a lengthy trial, Ramirez was convicted on 13 counts of murder and numerous other charges. On November 7, 1989, he was sentenced to death. He would spend the next 24 years on death row at San Quentin State Prison, filing appeals, corresponding with people who were disturbingly fascinated by his crimes. He died in custody on June 7, 2013, of complications from B-cell lymphoma. He was never executed. The conviction came 4 years after the arrest, but the impact on forensic science, on community organizing, on how we tell these stories is still unfolding. Let me show you what I mean. But this isn't a story that ends with conviction or death. The legal conclusion doesn't provide emotional closure, because closure isn't really how trauma works. For more ethical true crime content that respects victims and focuses on investigation rather than sensationalism, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're building a community that believes these stories matter, but only when they're told the right way. In true crime narratives, there's a tendency to focus on the perpetrator, to psychoanalyze, to trace their path, to treat them as the interesting center of the story. But the center of this story is, and always was, the people whose lives were interrupted or ended. Some victims survived and carried physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. Some spoke publicly about their experiences. Others chose privacy, which is their absolute right. Families grieved people they loved. Children grew up without parents. Spouses lost partners. The absence echoed through years. Justice through conviction is important. It matters legally and symbolically. But it doesn't bring anyone back. It doesn't erase trauma. It provides accountability, not healing. Healing, when it comes at all, is a different process. It's personal and communal. It's support groups and therapy and time, and the slow work of rebuilding a sense of safety in the world.
Some survivors and family members became advocates for victims' rights, working to ensure that other families would have better support systems, better resources, better recognition within the legal process. Their advocacy contributed to broader changes in how the criminal justice system treats victims and families. That work continues. The Night Stalker case contributed to broader momentum toward enhanced forensic coordination and technology adoption, though it would be oversimplifying to attribute systemic advances to this case alone. The late 1980s and early 1990s saw significant improvements in fingerprint database integration, ballistics tracking systems, and, crucially, the adoption of DNA profiling as a standard investigative tool. Multi-jurisdictional communication improved. The cooperation between Los Angeles County and San Francisco investigators during the Night Stalker case became a model, however imperfect, for future investigations that crossed city and county lines. The case also highlighted the importance of media coordination during active investigations. The decision to release Ramirez's photo, controversial at the time, influenced how law enforcement agencies thought about public information strategies. These weren't sudden transformations, they were gradual shifts, influenced by many factors, but the lessons from this case were part of that evolution.
Share this video with someone who loves true crime but wants to see it done differently, with respect for victims, accuracy about investigations, and focus on what we can learn rather than what shocks us. These stories matter, but how we tell them matters just as much. Today, the Los Angeles neighborhoods where these crimes occurred have changed. New residents have moved in. Children who were born after 1985 now have children of their own. But institutional memory persists. In community centers, in neighborhood watch meetings, in conversations between longtime residents, the memory of that summer remains. The physical changes are visible. More security systems, more locked windows, more vigilance about home safety. Some of that would have happened anyway as cities evolved, but some of it traces directly back to those months in 1984 and 1985. The psychological legacy is harder to quantify, but equally real. A generation of Southern Californians learned that home isn't automatically safe, that randomness exists, that bad things can happen to good people for no reason at all. That's a hard lesson, but it led to something else too. A recognition that safety is something we create together, that looking out for neighbors matters, that community connections aren't just pleasant, they're protective. The story of the Night Stalker is often told as a story of evil and fear, and those elements are certainly present, but it's also a story of investigative persistence, community courage, and the slow work of systemic improvement. The Night Stalker case didn't end with an arrest, or a conviction, or even a death in custody 28 years later. It continues in the lives rebuilt by survivors, in the families who carry absences, in the investigators who never forgot the weight of those case files spread across desks at 2 a.m. We tell these stories not to relive horror, but to honor resilience, to remember that behind every statistic is a person, that justice matters even when it's imperfect, that communities have strength they don't know they possess until they're tested. And we tell them to remember this: safety is something we create together. One locked door, one watchful neighbor, one act of community courage at a time. The windows in Los Angeles stay locked now, but underneath that necessary wariness, the same human desire for connection and safety persists. That desire to build homes, to create communities, to trust in tomorrow, that's what violence tries to destroy. And that's what survives.